A white police officer, furious and spitting with rage, standing face to face with a black man in the heart of a police station. Tension is thick in the air, but here's the shocking twist. That man, the one on the receiving end of the officer's fury, isn't just any man. He's the new police chief. How did this heated confrontation go from hatred to humility? Stick around, because the moment of truth is coming, and it will change everything. Imagine this. You're standing in the middle of a police station, surrounded by the cold, sterile walls of an office that's typically filled with the hum of quiet conversations and paper shuffling. But today, the air is thick, charged with tension. The silence is shattered by a loud, enraged voice. A white police officer, his face flushed with anger, is in your face, shouting with all his might. Spit flies from his mouth, hitting the air between you, as his words are fueled by nothing but pure rage. His chest heaves with every breath, and his eyes burn with a kind of fury that you've seen all too often in men like him. But despite his aggression, you remain calm. You stand there, arms at your sides, your body still, your eyes unwavering. There's a defiant look on your face, a steady resolve that shows no fear. This is not your first encounter with hostility. In fact, this might be the most intense. But it's far from the first time you've had to hold your ground. The officer, seething with rage, can't fathom what's happening. He's used to controlling situations, especially in this environment, where power dynamics often define every interaction. He's used to pushing people around, barking orders, and asserting his dominance with his uniform and rank. He's a man with authority in his eyes, and that authority is everything to him. His fists are clenched, his posture stiff with aggression. He's doing everything he can to make sure you know he's in charge. He's shouting, pointing, his words cutting through the air. To him, this moment is about humiliation. It's about showing you that, no matter who you are, he has control over you. He wants to make you feel small, make you feel powerless. In the background, there are other officers. Some of them watch with wide eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding in front of them. You can sense their hesitation. Some want to intervene, others are frozen, unsure of how to handle the situation. They've all seen confrontations like this before. But there's something different about this one. Maybe it's the raw emotion. Maybe it's the way the officer's rage fills the room. Or maybe it's because the person standing there, silently, enduring the abuse, isn't just some ordinary person. But what this officer doesn't realize, what no one in the room knows yet, is that you are not who they think you are. You are not someone they can push around. You are not just another officer, another subordinate, another face in the crowd. No, you are the one who will soon be calling the shots, the one whose words will matter more than anyone else's. The officer, blinded by his own arrogance, doesn't know that the person standing before him is about to change everything. What he doesn't know is that you are the new police chief. This revelation is something the officer will soon have to come to terms with, but right now, he's so consumed by his fury that he can't see past his own prejudice and anger. He assumes that because of your race, your stature, or perhaps even your demeanor, you don't belong in a position of power. He assumes that someone like you, a black man, could never rise to such a high rank in an institution that has long been governed by a certain image, the strong white authoritative figure in charge. But what he doesn't know is that you've earned your spot. Your years of service, your dedication, your integrity, they've all led you to this moment. This moment where you stand as a symbol of change, a symbol of a shift in power dynamics that no one, not even this officer, can ignore. While he rages, you stand tall, knowing the truth that's about to come crashing down on him. He thinks he's in control. But you, with your quiet strength, are about to show him that true power doesn't come from loudness, from spitting or yelling. It comes from the ability to stay calm, to remain composed, and to lead with purpose. As the tension builds, you can feel the weight of the situation shift. Everyone in the room is watching, waiting for something to happen. And that something, the moment when the officer's world comes crashing down, is just moments away. For many, the scene of a white officer spitting on a black man in a police station may seem utterly unfathomable, a shocking event that no one could ever imagine unfolding in a modern professional environment. But in reality, this situation is not as far-fetched as we might wish it to be. The truth is that beneath the surface of this confrontation lies a far more complex issue, one that speaks to the deeply ingrained prejudices, power dynamics, and mistaken assumptions that continue to plague society, especially within institutions like law enforcement. The officer's behavior is just the surface-level manifestation of something much deeper. a reflection of the unconscious biases and prejudices that have been instilled in him over years of social conditioning. From an early age, many of us are taught, either explicitly or implicitly, that authority comes with certain characteristics. In the case of law enforcement, the image of authority has often been tied to a specific set of stereotypes: white, male, and in a position of power. For years, these assumptions have shaped the way society perceives who can and cannot hold authority. So when this officer, in the heat of the moment, looks at you, a black man standing calmly, facing his rage, he sees not a person who could potentially outrank him but an outsider, someone who is not supposed to be in this world of blue uniforms and law enforcement power. He's been conditioned to think that someone who looks like you doesn't belong in the position of power he holds so dearly. To him, your race and your demeanor are immediately linked to a lack of authority, despite your qualifications, experience, and leadership skills. This is where the issue of prejudice comes into play. It's not just about one man's individual views, it's about the systemic and societal conditioning that has led him, and countless others, to assume that certain people, based on their race or background, are incapable of holding positions of leadership and authority. It's the kind of deep-seated bias that leads people to see others as less deserving, simply because they don't fit into the mold of what has traditionally been viewed as a figure of power. The officer's assumption that you, a black man, are somehow inferior or unworthy of the role you've earned is a reflection of the broader issue that still exists within law enforcement and society at large. He looks at you and immediately judges your worth and abilities based on outdated stereotypes, not on your skills, achievements, or potential to lead. Perhaps he thinks that someone like you, someone who doesn't look like him or doesn't come from the same background as he does, could never have reached the position of police chief. Maybe, in his mind, this was a role reserved for people who fit a certain profile, people who have always occupied these positions of power. It's a dangerous assumption, one that is rooted in history and perpetuated by the systemic biases that exist within many institutions. What the officer doesn't realize, in his moment of rage and prejudice, is that the world is changing. The assumptions he's relied on for so long are being challenged by people who refuse to accept these outdated views. In this moment, you are living proof of that change. You have worked hard, faced countless challenges, and earned your place. Despite his assumptions, you are the new police chief, a title that not only signifies your position, but also marks a shift in the power dynamics that this officer once took for granted. This moment of confrontation is not just a clash between two individuals. It is a representation of the larger cultural battle that is happening within law enforcement and many other institutions. It is a fight for respect, for equality, and for the recognition that authority and leadership should not be determined by the color of someone's skin, their gender, or any other outdated notion of what it means to hold power. In this instance, you stand as a symbol of progress, and the officer, unknowingly, stands as a representation of the prejudice and biases that are slowly being dismantled. The officer's anger has been building for what feels like an eternity, each word dripping with venom as he rages against you. His voice is loud, harsh, and filled with venomous accusations, as though he believes that his shouting is the only way to maintain control in this situation. He's ranting, consumed by his own fury, caught up in the belief that by being louder and more aggressive, he's somehow asserting his dominance. His hands are clenched into fists, and every muscle in his body seems to scream with hostility. But then, right in the middle of his tirade, something unexpected happens. A quiet voice from behind interrupts him, cutting through the noise like a knife. Did you know who you're yelling at? This is the new chief. He's your boss now. The words hang in the air for a split second, and in that moment, the officer freezes. It's as if time has stopped. His anger falters, his chest stops heaving, and his hands that were once clenched in rage suddenly loosen, his fists uncurling in disbelief. His eyes widen, blinking rapidly as though he's trying to process what has just been said. At first, he doesn't believe it. His brain refuses to accept it, caught up in the whirlwind of emotions and assumptions he's carried with him for so long. The realization hits him like a ton of bricks, crashing into his mind with a force that makes him stagger. For a moment, he simply stands there, his mouth slightly agape, staring at you as if seeing you for the first time. The tension in the room, which had once been electric with hostility, now thickens with a heavy silence. He looks at you, no longer with the anger and hatred that had been so clearly directed toward you moments before, but with something else. Confusion, shock, and then something far more profound, embarrassment. His face goes pale as the weight of the situation sinks in. He realizes, slowly and painfully, that everything he's just done, All the words he's spat, all the hatred he's directed at you, have been wasted. You, the man he thought he could dominate, are not just anyone. You are the new police chief, the person who outranks him, the person who now holds the power he thought he had. The realization sweeps over him like a flood, and in an instant, the arrogance he carried so confidently moments ago evaporates into thin air. The man who had been spitting venom now finds himself deflated, humbled, and facing a truth that he never saw coming. He takes an involuntary step back, his posture shifting from one of aggression to one of defeat. The realization that he has not only misjudged you, but also insulted his superior, settles into his bones. His entire worldview, shaped by the assumption that power was his to wield based on his rank, begins to crumble. For all his aggression and hatred, he has unwittingly picked a fight with the wrong person. The room falls completely silent, save for the sound of his breath, now shallow and quick, as if he's been winded. The other officers who had been standing on the sidelines now exchange uneasy glances. Some look at each other nervously, while others turn their attention to the floor, unsure of what to say or do next. They all saw the confrontation, but not one of them stepped in. Now, though, the situation has completely shifted. They're all watching, but not out of fear or anger this time. They're watching because they understand that something has changed. The officer who once held the power to yell at you is now the one who is questioning his own actions, his own behavior, and his own place in this room. His entire sense of authority has been shattered, and he stands there, feeling small and powerless, for the first time in a long while. An awkward silence fills the space. No one speaks. No one knows what to say. They can all feel it, the weight of the situation, the tension that's been replaced with something else entirely. It's no longer about who's in control or who's in charge. Now it's about realizing that the officer has been exposed for what he truly is. Someone who allowed his biases and assumptions to blind him. He misjudged you, and now he must live with the consequences of his actions. In that moment, you don't have to say a word. The realization has already done its job. The officer, for the first time in this encounter, is left questioning everything. His assumptions, his actions, and his place in the hierarchy of power. The room is thick with the realization that authority isn't determined by anger or force. It's determined by respect, integrity, and the ability to lead. And in that moment, you stand as a symbol of that truth. For the new police chief, this confrontation wasn't about asserting dominance, exercising power, or gaining control over anyone. It was about setting a standard that not only he, but every officer in that room, regardless of their rank, race, or background, would be required to follow. The new chief knew that his position carried with it a responsibility that extended far beyond issuing orders and carrying out police duties.
His leadership was about something more profound. It was about fostering respect, ensuring fairness, and creating an environment where everyone was held accountable, regardless of their personal biases or past behavior. This moment was not simply
about showing the officer that he had overstepped. It was about demonstrating that leadership and authority were not rooted in outdated perceptions or prejudices. The chief was no longer just a man wearing a badge. He was the embodiment of a new era in law enforcement. A new era that rejected the deep-seated biases that had for too long permeated the ranks of the force. His very presence in the room, especially after the confrontation, symbolized the shift that was happening in the police department and beyond. It wasn't just about one officer learning a lesson. It was about an entire institution rethinking what it meant to be a leader, what it meant to truly serve and protect. The chief understood that his role wasn't merely to command, but to change the very culture of the station, to break down barriers, and to challenge the norms that had too often upheld systemic inequalities. By showing restraint in the face of aggression, by standing tall and unshaken, he was sending a message to everyone in the room. Power doesn't come from intimidation, hatred, or spitting on someone. It comes from integrity, respect, and the ability to lead by example. As the chief stood there, watching the officer who had once been so confident in his position now cowering in his own shame, he understood that this was more than just a personal victory. This was a victory for justice, for equality, and for the future of law enforcement. It wasn't about humiliating the officer, it was about showing him, and everyone in that room, that leadership is earned through respect and action, not by the way someone looks or the assumptions they make based on race or background. This was the standard that the new chief would set. One based on merit, fairness, and the unshakable belief that authority should be measured by one's integrity, and ability to do what is right, not by prejudice or power plays. This was a wake-up call for the entire station. The officers who had stood by and watched the confrontation unfold were now forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. Things were changing. The chief wasn't just a figurehead. He was the embodiment of that change. No longer would they be able to operate in a system where bias and assumptions about authority went unchecked. Now they would be held to a higher standard, one where professionalism, respect, and fairness were paramount. They could no longer hide behind old habits, old biases, or old ways of thinking. For the officer who had spat in the chief's face, the lesson was clear and undeniable. It was a lesson in humility, a lesson in the dangers of prejudice, and a lesson in understanding that people should never be judged by the color of their skin, their appearance, or any other superficial trait. Instead, they should be judged by their actions, their character, and what they bring to the table. In this case, the chief had brought leadership, integrity, and the ability to rise above hate and anger. As the chief looked around the room, he knew that his work was far from over. This was just the beginning. He would need to continue to challenge these ingrained biases, to teach the officers that their duty to serve the community was far greater than the stereotypes or preconceived notions they may have carried with them. But in this moment, he had made an undeniable statement. Respect, equality, and professionalism would now be the core values of this police department, and any officer who couldn't embrace that would no longer fit within its ranks. In a world that has often been divided by race, class, and assumptions, the new chief wasn't just a man in charge. He was the person who would redefine what it meant to lead, to serve, and to protect. One step, one lesson, at a time. The situation may have begun with a moment of violence, anger, and prejudice, but as it unfolded, it transformed into something far greater, a powerful lesson, not just for the officer, but for the entire police department. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that moments like these will simply pass, leaving a trail of bitterness and unresolved tension. But for the new police chief, this was not just a confrontation to be put behind him. It was an opportunity to define the kind of leader he would be and set a precedent for the entire force. As he stood tall, composed, and resolute, the chief didn't let this incident define him or derail his sense of purpose. He didn't allow the officer's actions to rattle him or weaken his resolve. Instead, he turned it into a teaching moment, a chance to set the tone for what would come next. The chief understood that leadership wasn't about revenge or retribution. It was about building a foundation of respect, accountability, and professionalism that would ripple through the ranks, affecting not just this officer, but the entire station. Taking a deep breath, the chief steadied himself. The rage, the anger that had been directed at him moments before, had long since dissipated. He wasn't interested in fueling that fire or becoming trapped in the cycle of retaliation. Instead, he looked the officer in the eyes with a calm authority that demanded respect. His gaze was firm, but it didn't carry the weight of vengeance. It was steady and unwavering, as if saying, "I am in control now." "I don't hold grudges," the chief said, his voice steady, without a trace of anger. It wasn't just a statement. It was a principle. The words hung in the air, sharp and resolute. "But if you disrespect me again, there will be consequences. Not because of who I am, but because of the position I hold and the example I set." In that moment, the chief wasn't just asserting his authority as the new leader. He was making it clear that his role wasn't about personal vendettas or lashing out. It was about maintaining order, respect, and fairness, no matter who was in front of him. The officer, who had been so consumed by his own prejudice and anger, moments ago, now had no choice but to stand in the shadow of his own actions. The chief's words weren't just a warning. They were a reminder that leadership wasn't about pride or arrogance. It was about responsibility. And with that responsibility came the need to set the right example for those who followed. In the end, the story wasn't about revenge or showing dominance. It wasn't about humiliating the officer or taking pleasure in his discomfort. It was about something far more important: respect, accountability, and the power of leadership. The chief understood that this moment was far greater than the incident itself. It was a pivotal point, a turning point for both the officer and the entire department. It wasn't just about the officer learning a lesson. It was about setting a new standard. Leadership, as the chief understood it, wasn't about being the loudest, the most aggressive, or the one who instills fear. It was about rising above the hate and ignorance, about making decisions that benefit the whole, not just the individual. It was about creating an environment where every officer knew that integrity mattered more than bias, that accountability was non-negotiable, and that respect would be given and earned equally, no matter someone's background or rank. The chief had his work cut out for him. The path ahead would not be easy. Change, especially in a place steeped in tradition and rigid hierarchy, rarely comes without its challenges. But in moments like these, moments where the foundation of respect is laid, change isn't just a distant dream. It becomes a reality. The work of leading a police department, of transforming an institution mired in years of prejudice and outdated norms, is a long and complicated journey. Yet, with his unwavering resolve and commitment to fairness, the new chief was ready. He wasn't just a figurehead with a badge, he was a living symbol of change. And he would lead this department forward, step by step, building trust, upholding justice, and ensuring that no officer, regardless of their background, would ever again underestimate the power of respect, integrity, and leadership. And there, you have it, the story of how one man's prejudice was shattered and a new era of leadership and respect was born. It wasn't about power or dominance, but about integrity, accountability, and the courage to rise above hate. The new chief's journey is just beginning, and this moment marks the start of a much-needed change in law enforcement. Thank you for watching and diving into this powerful story with us. If this moment of transformation inspired you or made you think about leadership and respect in a new light, don't forget to show your support. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge the norm and inspire real change. We've got plenty more impactful content coming your way, and we want you to be part of this journey. Stay tuned, stay inspired, and always remember, true leadership comes from within. Until next time.